I never do.
Good morning. I will tell y'all that I have Miss Margaret's here with me and Susan Forbes from our office is here too. So good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Thank you, Robin. We appreciate that.
Good morning.
Hope everyone enjoyed your Memorial Day weekend.
It was good.
Well, we'll get started. First, we'll talk about the agenda for today. We'll give you a brief introduction, public engagement recap, the analysis of future development, overview of draft alternate development scenarios, and I'll give you some descriptions and a table related to that. And then we'll talk briefly about an outline for the land use plan report before we get into your homework and next steps. Next slide. So as you know, we're wrapping up phase 3, which is the public engagement process. We'll again go back out and test some things later on, but right now we're engaged in the analysis of future development, which is phase 4 of the project, and preparing for the land use plan and growth strategy report, which is phase 5. So a little bit about the public engagement and the summary of what we've heard there. You had a summary that we sent out in an email. Robin sent that to you yesterday. Participants expressed their appreciation for the square and local events, scenic drive, the river, picturesque rural landscape, including the farmland, quality of the school system and debt-free status in the county, proximity to hunting and outdoor recreation areas, and the sense of community was shared by all. Next slide. They also expressed a need for a variety of options, including multi-purpose civic gathering spaces, and that would be scattered throughout the communities, choice of housing types and price ranges, additional retail and restaurant options, expanded recreational opportunities, access to medical and healthcare services. Next slide. Regarding the topic of where development should occur, participants favored prioritizing development within existing communities, seeing development adjacent to existing communities where infrastructure can be served very easily, and then paying special attention to community gateways. There was strong opposition to rural development and forested lands, agricultural lands. Next slide. Some of the specific interests from the 4 different groups that we heard from youth, education, and recreation, they wanted to see dedicated space for recreation, education, professional training, and socializing. For general welfare, it was affordable housing options and access to transit. For municipal and utility groups, they would like to see access to quality health care, maintain safety and provide adequate municipal services. Geographic interest group would like to see tools and approaches to support property owners' rights and benefit from improved value while enabling the community to better achieve their vision and goals. Next slide. So as of yesterday, we had 647 responses to the survey that's online. We really appreciate you getting this out there. We're hoping to maybe get this to 1,000 responses, but 500 was our baseline, and we're very happy we're there. We'll probably leave this open for about another 2 weeks or so before we tighten up the market analysis. So in general, the activities and features that the respondents wanted to see more or greater in variety was entertainment venues, unique local restaurants, special activities, festivals, and street fairs, parks and greenways. I'm going to skip down to grocery because the 3 national brand retail stores, arts and cultural events, and employment opportunities were areas that they wanted to see, but not necessarily within walking distance, which is the next slide. So within walking distance, they wanted to see, again, there's 5 black topics, the parks and greenways. And related to that, they also introduced playgrounds, the entertainment venues, local restaurants, special activities, festivals, and street fairs, and the grocery within walking distance. Next slide.
Scott, what does that begin to tell us?
That is beginning to tell us the community does want to see some some of those assets nearby that are more neighborhood friendly, not necessarily the big power center areas, the retailers that you normally see in those areas, or the national tenants. But in the local, more walkable communities, you may want to see a local restaurant, you want to see your open space, maybe some activities and events as well.
And I'll just add this, and what that's also telling us guys is that, it's starting to talk about that distribution of investment and how that relates to, these are largely, existing residents. And so this is what existing residents want to see near them as far as investment in the community, from both investment within the existing communities, but then also investment in new development in new communities, in and around the existing municipalities. And so this begins to tell us about that relationship of rooftop, as it were, to amenities and to services, including both private and public services, so retail and in public services. And so that's important to keep in mind as we advance later in the presentation. This information, it's this relationship, and then we begin to combine this with things such as the market analysis, because of things that we understand regarding the number of rooftops, for example, per square foot of grocery store, and how to make that viable. It's not just about making sure that there's a grocery, can't just drop 100,000 square foot grocery store within 15 minutes of everybody. And I'm hoping there are a few chuckles on the line over that, simply because the market wouldn't support that unless you're in New York, in Manhattan. And so I don't think we're thinking about building Manhattan here. And so we have to begin to think about the scale versus the number of rooftops in those relationships.
Excellent. That survey also indicated areas where development or redevelopment should occur, and a lot of these are very similar to our public engagement open house. They're responding as, yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt just a moment and go back to that last? Ms. Barker had a question, and a really good question is, how do you measure like what we're seeing that we want, or that the community would like to see, maybe 4 or 5 nice restaurants? How do you measure whether the community could support that? Or would that just kind of come naturally? You'd start with one, and if there's enough support, the next one comes.
That's a great question, Robin. And so a lot of that from our standpoint is making sure that we right size the amount of retail space. And it's not just the amount of retail space, but that it's at a scale that is conducive toward, for example, restaurants versus, maybe some big box, but those are not the same thing. And so it's making sure that we have enough space to make sure that there is retail space for local restaurants, and that it's placed in such a way and located in such a way in relationship to the rest of the community that it's conducive to those restaurants and is supportive of their success. But then also making sure that their success translates back. It's a very positive feedback loop, because we're all optimists here, right? That the success of those small restaurants feeds back positively into the surrounding neighborhood, the folks that are the ones that are supporting those restaurants. It also makes their neighborhood stronger. And so it's making sure that we get those relationships and scale correct. Local restaurants can and that's a great question. And then you get into the nuances and the weeds of, well, a local restaurant can be in a shopping center next to Walmart, but then can also be there on the square. And there's not a right or wrong answer to that. And so it's making sure that we also have thus a diversity and variety of places for those local restaurants.
So think back to maybe the old corner store that you used to see around different communities, or the corner restaurant or pub or sub shop or deli. Something like that, something that's more neighborhood scale. There may be a few tables outside still to engage the street where people are enjoying both the inside and outside.
And I hope William's on the line, and sorry, and this is probably more than you wanted to talk about it, but it's a great question. And guys, it translates to almost all things, all uses, and everything we talk about here. If William's on the line, hopefully he'll give me a little bit of a leeway in this comment in saying that, to Scott's point, that local, the corner restaurant, if for some of the folks on here, if you remember, when I was a little kid, I still remember them being around a little bit, but not as much as they were. The Easy Ways, the neighborhood easy way, right? In many cases, an easy way or the local restaurant, the neighborhood kind of corner pub, restaurant, that type of place, zoning largely precludes that from occurring currently. There are a couple of places where it just so happens it can occur, but it largely precludes that from happening. So what we're hearing is that there is a desire to look at the relationship between some of these uses again, that there are things that might be appropriate closer and within our residential neighborhoods, but designed in such a way that it's supportive of those neighborhoods and not detrimental to those neighborhoods.
Right, smaller scale. Next slide. So the respondents also prioritized redevelopment of obsolete abandoned property in existing communities. So that was the top response. It was also followed by redevelopment of obsolete property along highway corridors and then development of vacant land along highway corridors with special emphasis on the gateways. There was also some desire for a balanced approach. Next slide. So related to mobility and movement, some of the responses here, these are the top 5: reduce traffic congestion. So we're talking about new roadways, extra turn lanes, extra lanes, and so on, where there's traffic problems. And related to that is improved safety at intersections and pedestrian conditions. So that may be a crosswalk at those intersections as well, or new roadways. And a better interconnected street system. So extending your street network out to help reduce traffic congestion. And then also increase mobility for seniors and people with limited mobility. Next slide. Now we're beginning to get into our draft future development analysis. And the methodology for doing this was we began to look at areas most suitable for development, analyzing existing communities, infrastructure capacity, community facilities, environmental constraints, potential areas for countryside conservation.
And let's talk about that word real quick before we go forward. Conservation. We are not looking at a strict rule and approach, guys, to this yet. This is, when we say countryside conservation, this is as much about noting those areas where development is less, let's say, it's constrained because of topography, because of, and it's also noting, you know, where some, for example, where some of our best soil types, and then floodplains kind of cross the line between environmental constraints and those areas of countryside conservation, of noting that we also want to reduce the county's vulnerability to storm events, things of that nature. We want to make sure part of being fiscally responsible is also being resilient, which means we don't, and I know you guys are super sensitive to this right now, we try to minimize our risk in where we develop. And so we're combining all of those things, but conservation is a strong word right there. So don't think that we're being overly aggressive or proactive in that yet. We'll be developing tools to speak toward that as we go forward.
Next slide. So keep in mind, this is an early pass at a map kind of showing where some of this future development may occur. So these are areas suitable for development. And a lot of this is based on your current assets on the ground, not taking in the public feedback.
So that's what this map represents. This is not where we're saying is area suitable right now. Like the map notes, it's without public feedback. And so we were simply overlaying existing investments essentially that you guys have made already, because that's being fiscally responsible, is to look at where do we already have investments made. And so that's in roadway, that's in the obvious things probably we think about the most when it comes to you know, building a building on a piece of land is roadway, you know, water service, sewer or not, things of that nature. And then we get into other issues, of course, such as, you know, well, you know, where are the schools? Where do the kids go to school? You know, if there's a fire, where is that service coming from? Where's that protection coming from? Is there police service or not? And then we also look at, because we began to hear this, you know, where are the existing communities? And so that talks about not just our municipalities, but talks about the place names that we all know, and in many cases, so a lot of people in here live in some of these places such as, Randolph and Charleston, Gift, Drummond's, places like that. That those are real places. Those are also places where the community's made investment. And so that's what you're seeing here is this amalgam of all of these different ideas as far as this is where we've made investment. And we know, and the reason this is important is not just from utility and infrastructure standpoint, we know where we've made investments as a community. So in parks and schools, like I said, in fire stations and other services, community centers, things like that. That all of those investments go towards supporting and maintaining the quality of an investment. So imagine, it's much more difficult to maintain the quality of a place when there are no amenities. You get a few of them. There are folks, hey, and there are times where I just want to move out onto 20 acres and not see anybody, for a weekend or more. And there are people that want to do that all the time, but that's not everybody. And even those folks need a grocery store every now and then. And they actually want to go to a park, even though they live on a park. There are all these other things that they want to be able to do, that they want to have schools, great schools for their kids and things like that. And so all of those are amenities, if you will. Even if they're just basic kind of quality of life stuff, they're still amenities. And so the more amenities you have nearby, generally speaking, the easier it is to maintain the quality of that investment in any one location. The fewer amenities you have, the more at risk that investment is at least the quality. As far as quality goes, the more at risk the quality is for that investment going forward.
And one thing I should point out here, the lighter areas are those areas where some of these assets are concentrated. The darker green areas are areas that are more remote and harder to access and harder to develop.
Or where there simply aren't those amenities.
Right.
And so, those lighter areas, this is all layered up. Each one gets a little bit of a value. And so you can see how it builds up. And so where there are certain areas where it's very focused, where we have our existing amenities and infrastructure. And there are places where much of that is lacking.
Right. But we must marry this vision, this map with the vision statement and guiding principles and the public feedback that we heard, which drives us to this page here on the left. You see your vision statement and guiding principles for the county. This is from the website. And specifically related to guiding principle number 2, ensure the development, investment, respect, build upon, and enhance the unique character of Tipton County, including its diverse communities, sensitive environmental features, scenic resources, and farmland. And that's what we heard over and over at the public engagement photographs you see on the right. Next slide. And this is just a little teaser. We're going to come back to this map. So taking that into account, we're beginning to tighten things up where those areas are most suitable for development. Next
Now
slide.
that's, Scott, let's linger on this. Sure. So let's talk about that again, reemphasize.
Yeah, we're going to come back to this. We have a table that we're going to talk about some different development areas and refer back to this, but the areas that you see more in white here are most suitable for development.
And so that's in combination with where, not to belabor the point, but really, it really is to belabor the point to make sure that everybody gets this or understands this, is that it's a combination of things. It's where we see we're combining that existing infrastructure being all things from roads, utilities to schools, parks, police, fire, hospitals, everything. We're combining that with the feedback we've received from the public, because that gets its own weight in measuring this. And this is a draft, as you've noted, by the giant draft stamp on it, which that's purposeful. This is our first pass at this.
Yeah, one other thing I want to point out on this map, you can see the municipal boundaries in yellow and the urban growth boundaries in orange. That is in a table we're about to show you, and we'll refer back to this map.
Hey, wait, could you linger on that? In fact, I'm not sure. Can we zoom in on this? If we can't, don't worry about it. Or would you zoom in on just like right? Sorry, guys, we're going to zoom in real quick just to make sure that those were clear. As an example, okay, and then just scoot over and stuff too. Thank you. Is that you'll note the yellow line, for example, around Covington, similar for Garland, Burleson, Gilta Edge, there's one for Brighton, and of course, Atoka and Munford. And that you'll notice that that's the municipal boundary that we're referring to. The orange boundary is the existing urban growth boundary for that municipality. The white area, the whitish area is the area we discussed earlier as being most suitable, from what we've heard and seen for development and investment. And then the green area is that area which is less suitable for development and investment for various reasons. These little yellow splotches, that's high quality farmland according to Tennessee Ag. And so just laying in the striped are the floodplains. So that's just laying all that out, but I really want everybody to really, yes, ma'am.
What is the gridded circle that's around the airport?
That is a special district that's noted right now by the county, and it may be something related to the flight path.
Yeah.
Maybe Sean could clarify that a little bit for us, but.
It's an important enough piece of information that it was in your future land use plan,
Okay,
and we'll get more information on that. And so it's again, so it's those, think of it as being in general, those several areas that are on there. In those categories, because we're about to get right back to those categories of areas within the yellow line, areas within those orange boundaries, areas outside of those boundaries, the white and green areas. So there we go.
Okay, so in analyzing the public engagement findings and areas most suitable for development, there are two primary areas identified, and that is within the community and then within the countryside. And what we're talking about within the communities, within those existing yellow boundaries, and then also directly adjacent to those boundaries, but within the urban growth boundary. And for the countryside, it would also be focused at four ways, and we're talking about places like Charleston. It also could be necessarily conservation clusters, and what we're talking about there is concentrating development, maybe a higher density on 25% of the land, so that 75% of the land can remain as farmland or natural area. And then the typical more rural residential classifications that you have today, the forest agricultural residential and the R1 zoning districts out in your county. And we'll talk more about comparison to that as well. Next slide.
Should we stop here and ask if there are any questions? Scott, do you want to do that yet? Or do you want to come back to it?
Are there any questions?
There's a lot, guys. We realize that this is drinking from a fire hose and some of this.
And if you think of something while we're talking, please place them in the chat box. We'll come back to that. We're going to pause after we get through these development scenarios, and we'll refer back and forth to the table and the map as well. Okay, so that leads us to the 5 different development scenarios. This was in the packet that was sent out by Robin yesterday. So there were 5, and that begins with the as of right build out development potential under existing zoning. And this would be basically maxing out development, what is allowed today under your zoning. The next one is the typical business as usual development pattern. And I want to thank William and Sean for helping us verify what we thought was the pattern here in the county. And what we're talking about is a comparison between the as of right build out, business as usual rural residential in these 2 districts, the FAR and R1 zoning district. The FAR zoning district allows for 1 home per acre. That is very dense for a forest agriculture residential zoning district anywhere. It's almost unheard of, and in fact, it's not occurring in your county. Sean and William helped us verify that over the last 5 years, the average home built on a lot that size averages over 12 acres. For the R1 zoning district, your zoning allows for 1 home per 30,000 square feet, or about 2/3 of an acre. However, over the last 5 years, the average lot size is almost 6 acres. So that is the business as usual. The as of right is the red, the business as usual is the black. So that is really, the black is what's occurring today. It's that second development scenario. We also heard a desire for a little bit of a balanced growth pattern. That is the third scenario we want to study, and would like to hear your feedback on this. The fourth scenario begins to concentrate developments. Now we're going to be over 50% more of what we heard in our community engagement. So this would be more focusing development within the communities, but also clustered around in the countryside. And then finally, the last one would be a community concentration and countryside conservation. And what we're talking about there is a 75% plus concentration within your existing communities, and then some development out in your countryside as well, but limited. Next slide. Next slide. There you go. So here we have the table. On the left, you see the development scenarios, starting at the first one as of right. Business as usual, the balanced pattern, community focused and clustered, and then finally the concentrated or developing your cores. And I want to point out the community tab, which is the next two rows. So that's within your existing municipal boundaries. That's that yellow line we talked about. And then within your urban growth boundaries is within the orange that we were talking about as well. In countryside, four ways are kind of your rural communities, your Charlestons and so on. So those areas that may be highlighted in white as well, but surrounded by the green. Then community clusters that cluster in the development, and then your typical R1 and FAR zoning districts. So this, you can see how it's building. The as of right is maxing out both the community and countryside. We'd like to study that as kind of the baseline to see where that puts you fiscally. Then the business as usual. What's happening today is about 25% within your municipal boundaries, another 25% within your urban growth boundaries, and the other 50% out in the rural countryside. The more balanced pattern, and this is also 50% within your community, would start to increase and take into account what we heard from the public, to more concentrate that in your existing community at 35%, then 15% in those urban growth boundaries. But also still allow for a lot of the typical R1 and FAR that you see over on the far side. So you can see we're on the far side, we're coming down, and we're beginning to build up on the left side into percentages. The fourth scenario, the community focused and clustered in the countryside. Now we're over 50% within the community. The 50% in existing municipal boundaries, an additional 10% in your urban growth boundary, 5% in your four ways, and a conservation cluster, this is more concentrating in rural areas, and then reducing the number in FAR and R1 areas. Finally, the community concentration or core concentration now focused about 80% within the community or 75% within existing municipal boundaries. They also have a bump within the four ways and rural community clusters. And then kind of decreasing once you get out into the county and the FAR and conservation cluster areas. So we're going to look for you and your feedback on each of these scenarios. We're going to send this PDF out so you can look at this more closely. And over the next week or so, provide us some comments or confirmation that this is acceptable to study in order to try to get to that preferred development scenario.
Okay, guys, so I ran through this quickly. This is a lot of like numbers on a page if we're not careful. And so I really would like to hear if there are any questions or feedback at this point. Just noting that I think some of this that's guiding this that we did hear is both that this isn't just based on what we heard from the community, that we've also heard about the need and desire to have a balanced and fiscally responsible approach to investment. And that we also have aging infrastructure that will need to likely be considered if it's not already on the schedule to be replaced and upgraded. It's pending. You probably there's a lot of things you guys probably want to have on that list as far as sewer, road, water infrastructure. And so it's making sure that we're being prudent and fiscally responsible with where we're both upgrading and improving existing infrastructure. But if we do build and extend infrastructure, then we're also being prudent and mindful of that as well, because that becomes, that may allow for some quick, easy development. But it will also create, as we know, depreciation begins almost immediately on that. And that's something that the community will then need to maintain from that point forward, along with the still needing to upgrade or replace existing infrastructure that's already in the ground and being able to pay for that. So this is taking that approach of how far do we begin to push our infrastructure? How hard do we begin to push that? And how important is it that we invest in our existing communities to achieve the vision and the goals that have been clearly stated by both you guys and then confirmed by the community? All knowing, and I'll shut up, so, because I did ask questions, comments, all while being aware of, again, we've got a lot of investment coming, but it's not a blank check. It's not a bottomless well of investment.
Could I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
In looking at this chart, the very first line of the as of right build out, you have two 100%, which I assumed was 100% of the community is in the municipal and 100% of the rural of the countryside is in rural residential. But then when you drop down to the next four scenarios, you're grouping those together.
Yes, that's confusing, Mr. Taylor, and thank you for bringing that up. So what we're really saying is in the as of right build out is that we'll essentially be building out, we'll create a model in which everything is developed according to its zone type across the entire county, regardless. And so really, if anything, it should say 100% in each one of those categories. But really, we're not considering the conservation cluster in rural communities because there's only a few places where that has special zoning in the county. If we had the zoning map, I would pop it up if we should have had that available to talk about that. And we could probably pull that up toward the end of the meeting. But it's saying that we take that existing zoning in the county and within the communities, and let's go ahead and build it out according to how it's zoned right now. So everything else is 100%. And really that is saying, well, if anything, the top line is 100% of the county is developed. Does that make sense? The top line is kind of, it's in large part ignoring market study because we know that there's not enough demand within the next 10 or even 20 years to completely build out the county at its maximum build out potential according to existing zoning. And there's just not enough demand. You'd have a county of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. And I mean, not 200, I mean, Lord knows, 500,000 people. And so that's that top line, just saying, what does existing zoning get us without considering the market, just if we built it out? Everything else below that very much takes into consideration that market analysis. How many homes do we expect to be built in the next 10 to 20 years? How much square footage do we expect to be built in retail, commercial, and then industry within that time period as well? So all of those will take that in that market analysis into consideration. Does that make sense? Hopefully, maybe.
I'm still.
If not, that's a fair answer too.
It's still not clear to me.
Wait. Okay, hold on a second. I'm gonna get Wayne here. We should have had this up here in this presentation anyway. That's our fault. Well, we're gonna pull up the zoning map right now. And so basically we're saying is that in that top one, that build out scenario is this is your existing zoning for the county. And so, of course, what we're also looking at, we'll be looking at Brighton and its, the zoning within Brighton, both the municipality and its urban growth boundary, as well as Covington and its urban growth boundary, and as well as within the existing boundaries of the other municipalities. So we're saying, okay, well, if we build this out, if we allow this to be built out according to its existing zoning, what would that get us? How many homes, how many square feet of what? But then also, what are the fiscal impacts of that? For example, I can tell you a lot of these roads were not designed to handle existing zoning. You know, and I think we all recognize that. That's not news to anybody. Is we have a lot of 1 and 1.5 lane wide country roads. That if you were to build this thing out, that a lot of those roads would have to be upgraded, for example. We have to have a lot more schools. We need a lot more fire stations. We need more police. We might, I would assume, want a few more parks and open spaces. And there'd be a lot of people that'd be a heck of a long way from a grocery store, but I'm not going to get into that. They'll just be driving a long way to the nearest grocery store. But we would be showing, what does this thing look like built out according to what it's assigned in zoning? And what are the impacts of that? So that's the first, and that is saying, let's just say there was infinite demand. So what does that look like in a world of infinite demand where everything gets built out according to its zoning? What does that look like?
Does that help?
So that's that first line in that chart. The other lines, so that's kind of, okay, we need to understand that that is the baseline for which this county is legally set up for right now. That is, that base zoning and build out is, well, legally, that's what could happen in the county. Okay, well, legal in reality, no offense to any lawyers, that there's legal and then there's reality. The market also has a say. So that next line, which was the business as usual line that Scott described, that's saying, okay, well, there is a market. And the market says that, one, we're probably not going to have 600,000 people moving into Tipping County in the next 10 to 20 years. I hope everybody can agree to that point. Maybe probably not desirable considering what we've heard. And then so beyond that, it's also saying, okay, well, it starts to take into consideration, okay, so we're going to have X number of homes coming in within the next 10 to 20 years. And we know a percentage of those will be occurring within the FAR if we just keep going down the road we've been going on the last 5, 10, 20 years. But when they build within this area that's zoned as FAR right now, the green, that's that green area, that they build at 12, it's 1 home per 12 acres, not 1 home per 1 acre. So what does that look like? How much space? What's the footprint of that? How much space is that going to eat up in the countryside or not? We know that within this R1 area, that homes are being built. And we know that they're not being built at 1 home per about every 2/3 of an acre. They're being built at 1 home per a little bit less than 6. It's 1 home per a little less than 6 acres. And so what does that look like? How much space within that yellow area that's not already developed will be developed in that business as usual? And as we all know, and we've talked about this a lot, probably you're tired of hearing me talk about it, is that there are costs associated with that business as usual model. Costs specifically in roads and infrastructure, that's going to be a higher cost there. But there will also be costs as far as school, fire, police, and then distance traveled. There will be a quality of life impact of the distance traveled and the amount of traffic you're simply going to see on those roads. And so we want to be able to quantify that and show you guys that fiscally, to show you what are the costs of those impacts following that model. But that second line, so that's that second line there, the business as usual, that is informed by the market, which calls for how many homes, Scott? Approximately
5,400
5,400 new homes
over 20 years.
over 20 years. And the almost 2 million square feet of, I believe, right?
That's right.
About 2 million square feet of retail and commercial development. And so that's what that second model entails. So before we go, does that, did I confuse everybody or did it help at all or neither?
Well, since I opened this can of worms, I think I'm beginning to see where you're leading, but we need to go further down on that chart than where you are. I think what you're saying is we need to make some sort of decision as to what direction we want to go so that we begin to plan our infrastructure. Is that?
That's correct. Yes, sir. And that's part of what those models are intended to do is each one of those models will, so each one of those that we laid out And that doesn't mean that those percentages are set in stone. We can adjust those, but that's our recommendation, our starting point, is that each one of these will have that fiscal analysis associated with it. And so you'll be able to actually see the costs as far as infrastructure and services and facilities based on each one of these approaches. Of this is how much it costs to follow that particular model. So the as of right build out, the business as usual, the balanced growth, community focused, and community concentration. Each one of those will have a cost associated with it for all those things. And it won't be like one big price tag. It'll be broken down so you guys can really analyze it and understand it and ask questions. And so that, yes, then based on all of that and your feedback, so not only on the land use side and the how it satisfies our vision and goals, but also on the fiscal impact side, you know, we've said it before, we can build utopia, but there's a really hefty price tag, probably more money in the world than there's money in the world. But there's really great places we can build for that are affordable, relatively speaking. And so we'll identify based on all of these and kind of the outcomes for each one. Your feedback and the community's feedback will tell us, okay, well, here's where the actual preferred plan is. This will all feedback on these models. Your take on these models will then tell us, okay, this is where we need to go for our preferred land use plan. And then there will be another fiscal impact analysis of that, which will then help you make long-term decisions about infrastructure investment, among many other things, to achieve that preferred land use plan.
And it's likely that each of the percentages are a little bit different than what you see on your screen.
Oh, yeah, there's a good chance that you guys will say, well, we really like one of these models, except I like this little bit about this other one. I like this quarter of the other one, and I like this little pinch of salt from this other one. And that will end up crafting your preferred land use plan.
Sorry, so
Wait, so before we go forward, other questions? That was a really good question. I'm glad we talked about it. Hope y'all are.
Let me just, I just want to, so we're talking about, it's the same amount of people that are coming in. This is just where we want them to be in our.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
and the fiscal impacts of each of those.
Yeah.
So think about this over the next week or so and send us comments. We'll get this out to Robin real quick and hopefully on the website. Maybe even as early as this afternoon.
Based on y'all's feedback. Improve.
Is there any other comments here?
We're going to take a chat, guys. Can you see? I think there's some folks that are chatting us. At the bottom, see Zoom. Notifications there, is that not? We're going to check the chat real quick.
There's nothing in chat.
Okay, there we go. All right.
All right, well, let's go to the next slide. So keep in mind those white areas from the last table. This is that map again, showing where those areas most suitable for development might be. And your existing communities just adjacent to those in the 4 ways.
Sorry. We're gonna just annotate here for a second, if y'all let me, let the meeting proceed. So again, yellow boundary. So for example, if I set an area within our existing communities, that would be, here. So that's within the existing municipality of Brighton. Same thing here. I put it right there. If I get it right along the road there in Garland or Gilt Edge, those are areas that are within our existing community. Those areas that are adjacent to the existing communities. That's here, right outside the municipal boundaries of Covington, but within our urban growth area. Same thing here, Brighton, places like that. And then those areas that are the 4 ways, that's stuff pretty clearly, Charleston, Gibb, basically any of these locations that don't have a municipal boundary around them. When we talk about that, that's where those occur. And then the conservation, the clusters and the FAR, that's anywhere within the green zone that are outside those white areas. So those are those different categories.
It could be that some of that cluster development occurs closer to your existing communities and your four ways.
We'll get into that later.
We'll go to the next.
Yes, we will. Yes, we'll be sending this out, in a PDF, just in case for anybody who's having poor reception or anything like that.
Absolutely. So we did look at land use form intensity, roads, infrastructure, those community facilities in doing these maps, but then also taking into account your comments, protection and enhancement of those community assets and the natural and environmental features and so on.
Oh,
Are there any more questions before we move on to a brief outline of what the report might be?
I'm good. I'm in a meeting. What you need?
Yes, sir.
I don't know, Pat.
Any questions?
This is Terry Collin.
I
Is
thought-
there a reason that there's no areas identified in the Munford and Atoka areas?
They are outside of our study area. And so we will be relying and deriving information based on their existing comprehensive plans, which were either recently completed or have been updated recently enough for us to incorporate in the overall plan.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
If you go to the outline. Okay, so this begins to get into what the report might include, which is phase 5. So of course, we'd have the cover page acknowledgements and table of contents to start. But we go through an introduction, a lot of what you've already heard in your earlier hearing committee meetings and in the public engagement, both identifying your vision statement, guiding principles in chapter 1. That public engagement will be heard in the visioning sessions, the open house, what the survey is beginning to reveal. The next slide. Chapter 3 is what we're into today, beginning that analysis of future development, tightening up our market analysis based on the public engagement in the survey, finding those areas most suitable for development, discussing it and talking about these alternative development scenarios and testing those both with you, the community, once we get the fiscal analysis back of these, and then identifying that preferred growth scenario, or that is again tested. And will show up in the actual preferred growth strategy and land use plan in chapter 4, which would also include a executive summary, some growth principles, the land use plan and graphics, that fiscal analysis that we talked about. Then chapter 5 would include your implementation, the next steps and what your priorities are. Getting into those recommended future planning services, and that might including we're talking about that FAR and the R1 zoning districts. It might be right sizing those to what's actually occurring on the ground. And I will speak of the FAR zoning district is very rare to see 1 unit or 1 house per acre in any FAR district.
We'll come back to that. There's a lot of reasons for that. We'll come back to that. I don't want to weigh y'all down with that today.
Absolutely. And then the supporting documents for your appendixes. So talking about like base maps, the full market analysis, survey results and things like that. So next slide, which leads us to your next steps and a little bit of homework. So what we'd like you to review, first of all, is what was sent out from Robin yesterday, your public engagement summary and the alternate development scenario summary. And then this PDF, which will be sent out later today, to look at that table and those different development scenarios. And if you can, send your comments back to me by June 7th. And at your next meeting, we will look to approve and confirm those development scenarios at your next meeting, which is tentatively scheduled for June 28th. And that is to tighten those up so that we can begin to move on into that fiscal analysis of those.
So guys, this was, and I'll wrap this. I mean, just one more thing. I've interjected too much in this meeting, but I just want y'all to know that, we understand this is a lot. Guys, this is a lot for me when I do this. And so if there's a need, or if you guys want to get on the phone again with us individually or anything like that, please let us know. If there's a group of you that want to get together on the phone to talk about these things in more depth than either you're comfortable with or want to talk about them today or have time, please let us know. I really want to make sure that everybody has a grasp on this and is comfortable with us moving forward, because this in so much, in so many, in every way determines our path for the future. We can't create that preferred land use plan without getting a solid foundation here, and this is the foundation of that. And so I would much rather take more time and make sure everybody's on board than us to rush through this and there'll be questions. So please let us know specifically for Scott's comment to keep us on track between now and the 7th, preferably. And we'll accommodate that and make sure that we can walk through it and answer any questions. So yeah, just it's if you feel like this is a lot, it's because it is. You're justified.
Now, one thing I'd like to mention, that map that we showed you with the white areas. Between now and your next meeting, we're going to probably get some more information back on our market analysis. So we're going to try to start assigning what numbers might occur in some of those white areas.
Literally what goes where at that point.
So that's one thing we're going to talk about the next meeting. We'll talk about these alternate development scenarios, and then we possibly will have a mock-up of the format of the report to begin to talk about as well, kind of taking the outline that you saw to the next step. That pretty much wraps up our presentation today. I'd like to know if there's any more comments or questions, and if you have comments, please send them to me, send them to Robin, and we'll try to get you answers as quickly as we can. And we appreciate your participation today. This recording will be also made available on the website.
So before we end it, are there questions, are there comments? We don't have to shut down hard at noon. So if you guys want to keep talking about it or have questions, we're happy to stay on and walk through them.
Scott, do we have a time for that Zoom meeting on the 28th?
I'll likely be at 11 a.m. again.
Okay.
And we'll send that invite out within the next week or so, hopefully by the 7th.
Well, I don't want to make anybody stay on the line if you don't have questions, but please ask if you do. We have time, we can stick around. And if not, please reach out. If you'd rather wait till after, please reach out. We'll shut up here for a minute too, where you can actually ask a question.
The chat box is open as well.
I think once we're able to send out that PDF, and people have a chance to look through that more, we may have, more questions at that point, so we can get some email threads going or set up a call. Thanks for that offer. That might be helpful. But thank you so much. Interesting information.
Yes, ma'am. And let us know if there's anything else, Robin or anybody. If there's anything else we can do to help this if there are any other like references or visual aids or anything that you think might help in kind of picking this thing apart and considering this, let us know and we'll do our best. We'll respond and get that to you.
Okay, and one other homework I'd like to add, we're at 647 responses. I really would like for us to get to that goal of 1,000. I mean, with 60,000 residents, over 60,000 residents, 1,000 doesn't seem like too much. I'd like to ask everybody to share that again on their social media and maybe tag some people and say, hey, would you share this with 10 people? And I'll do that today too, and tag some of y'all. And if we try to get that out and get as many people as possible, because that's, if we get 353 more people, we could get to that 1,000 mark. So
Robin, just
That
for
would be
the sake
awesome,
of,
Robin.
Robin, just
Sorry,
for
go
the
ahead.
sake, Robin, just for the sake of some of us, would you send the survey again to us so we can send it
I
out?
will. I
Thank
sure
you.
will. Thank you.
And Robin, to add to that, some people, it won't pick up 353, but it might pick you up another 25 to 50. I think once we get some of this material on the website, on the project website, including some draft maps and things, this will get a lot more real for a lot of people. And so suddenly people who didn't think they had an opinion will suddenly have an opinion, and that could be a good thing specifically where that survey is concerned.
That's a good point. We can, I'll send that out to the link to where everything, all this information is. And yeah, we'll get that out there for as many people as possible to be looking at it and voice their opinions on it. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Robin. We really
Yeah.
appreciate your help too.
Hey, guys, and again, thank you to the committee. Thank you for having us and, inviting us to engage in this process. We've really enjoyed working on this with you guys. And you guys are rock stars, our rock star steering committee. It's a big band to be all rock stars, but you're making it happen. So thank you guys for everything that y'all have been doing.